There we go. Everybody hear me? All right. Money, money, money. Where did the... There it is. I'm just going to stand here for 40 minutes saying money, and you guys are going to cheer. Okay. So I'm going to talk about making money with spatial computing, or at least trying to. So, sweet. A little bit about me. So I am a developer advocate at a company called RevenueCat. You can see I'm covered in RevenueCat gear pretty much all the time. We are a company that builds SDKs and a backend. Hello. For mobile apps to add in-app purchases and subscriptions into their app. And it makes it a lot easier for doing that, and there's a whole bunch of powerful features. If you're interested in that, please come out to my booth and talk to me about it, and I'll talk your ear off. RevenueCat is a global company, so we're distributed like all over the world, but I live in America in a town called St. Louis, Missouri in the middle. Almost nobody here has probably heard of it, but I've run into a couple people, and that was very exciting, so thank you for that. When I'm not working in my day job, I'm also an indie developer. I make quite a few apps. I'm going to talk about 3 of them here. So the first is Dark Noise. This is probably my main app that's doing the best. It's a white noise, ambient noise app for the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. People use it for going to sleep or focusing while they're working. And this one is a subscription app. I also have a visionOS app that made it on day 1. I was very proud of that. It's kind of a spin-off of white noise, but trying to make it native for visionOS. And so you can see in this demo, this one is whenever you tap on a sound, it doesn't just start playing it. It opens it in a totally separate window. And then you can place that anywhere in your room or around your house if you're making a crazy demo like this. And it'll play it from that physical space, similar to the talk you just saw, actually. Except I'm not doing cool 3D graphics with it. More or less, I made this as an experiment to try and understand how I could bring dark noise to visionOS in the future. But I made this one a in-app purchase, one-time in-app purchase. So this one's different than dark noise as far as business models go. And then I also ran into this issue where taking screenshots with Vision Pro is weirdly hard. I don't know if anybody else runs into this, but I learned that, yeah, my head, apparently I walk around with my head sideways because none of my pictures were ever level. So I made an app called Level Headed that just tells you how level your head is. And it also draws a frame, like a box that you can see, which tells you where the screenshot's actually going to go. And this one's just a paid upfront app. So I've kind of run the gamut of different types of business models that you can have. So I have a little bit of experience with that, with my apps. And then, like you mentioned, I think, in the little opening thing, I have a podcast called Launched, where I talk to indie app developers about building apps. The most recent episode that's up actually was a video podcast, which I don't normally do, where I talked to Devin Davies, who talked yesterday, and Christian Seelig, who makes Juno, the YouTube app for visionOS. And we kind of talked about our experience building something for visionOS and launching it, and what we thought about the platform and how it's going. I bring all these up mostly to brag, but really because I think about the business of apps a lot. I think about it in my day job. I think about it in my hobbies. Slowly, all my friend groups are all iOS developers, and so that's what we talk about in our free time. It's just kind of become an obsession of mine. Is thinking about not just the technology of apps, but how businesses can work and grow on these platforms, because they're kind of these organic economies of their own. So last year, when I was at Cupertino, not at Apple Park, but I was at least in a room with a bunch of other developers, when Apple announced the Vision Pro, not only was I super excited about the technology and what it means for Apple going forward and all that, but I was also really interested in that little blue button there that opens a brand new app store. This is a new platform from Apple that we can build apps and sell them to customers. We haven't had that in a while. I think the last one was the Apple Watch, really. I mean, there was iMessages, but we all kind of decided to forget about that one. And so I'm really interested and curious in how the economy of a new app store can play out and what works. Is it going to be the same as on iPhone, or is it going to be something completely different? And I think I'll just tell you the really quick answer, which is it's different. This is not a gold rush. If you all were around when the original iPhone came out, there was all these stories of like fart apps that were making $1 million a day somehow. You know, I think my favorite example of this is this app called iBeer. Does anybody remember this? It was yeah. It was like literally all it did was simulate drinking a beer. And the reports were that this guy was making, I think, $20,000 a day for a while on this app. And that was because, you know, this was like a huge moment. It was a big deal. But it's also because there was a lot of people that had this device and they were hungry for apps. And so is visionOS like this? It's not right now. And I'm going to like show you that with some numbers. I don't want this to come across as like, is the Vision Pro a failure, or is it a success, or how does it compare? The context for this conversation is, as developers, for us, if we're going to try and sell apps in the store and make money, what should we expect? And the only points of comparison we have, at least as Apple developers, is the other platforms Apple's made. So I just want to like compare to those platforms using some numbers. So let's look at the original iPhone and how many units it sold whenever it first came out. So in its first 2 days, the original iPhone sold 270,000 units. That's coming from Apple, which was very exciting, big deal. Everybody was super excited. Changed Apple forever. In the first 74 days, it sold 1 million units. And then in its first year, I couldn't actually get a number from Apple on this. So this is coming from Wikipedia and a bunch of places. So this one's not as reliable. But around 6.1 million units, million iPhones were existing in the world after its first year being on the market. If we look at the Vision Pro, we don't actually have numbers from Apple. They haven't given us that. So this is all based on rumors and conversations and things. So these numbers are going to be a little more fuzzy, but I think they still illuminate a general area that we should be looking at here. So about 160 to 200,000 pre-orders were made, which actually is similar to what the iPhone was in its first 2 days. So that's like pretty exciting. There's a good like initial user base that wanted to get this right on day one. But if we look at the number of orders that they're making in projections for the year, it's not as big. Now, this number is actually based on, supposedly based on rumors, Apple increased their production runs because they're selling more of them than they thought they were going to. Which is why this is still can be a successful platform and be smaller than the iPhone. But it's smaller than the iPhone, and I really want to illustrate that. So if we graph this out, you can see it's pretty dramatic. And this graph doesn't actually tell the story, because when the iBeer app came out, it wasn't during the original iPhone. The original iPhone didn't have an app store. So that was actually when the iPhone 3G came out. So we actually have to move forward a year to make this real comparison. So if we look at when the App Store launched, the iPhone 3G sold 1 million units in its first weekend. And then in its first year, again, I couldn't get this one from Apple. This is coming from Renee Ritchie at iMore. But they supposedly sold about 20 million 3G units in their first year. So if we graph that out, it's a much more dramatic number. And you also have to include all the people who bought the original iPhone who didn't buy this 3G, because those units are also out there in the world. So it's actually more like this. This is what the world looked like when the App Store was out in its first year, and people were selling apps. And that little tiny bar at the bottom on the other side, I'm pointing over here like you guys can see it. Over here, that's the context that we are selling apps right now. So we have to keep that in mind. And there's one other piece to this, which is competition. So it's not just how many units are out there, but it's also how many apps are we competing with. So if we look at the original iPhone when it came out, there were about 500 apps available on day one. That's coming from Apple. If we look at the Vision Pro, which just came out, there's actually 600 native apps for the iPhone, which is really similar. I was actually kind of surprised at how similar. I thought there would be a lot more native visionOS apps just because people already know Swift. Like everybody had to learn Objective-C back then because there weren't that many Mac developers already. But this comparison isn't exactly accurate because there's also 1 million iPad-compatible apps available on Vision Pro. And we're all developers. We know that that experience isn't nearly as good as the native Vision Pro apps are. But if you've opened the App Store on Vision Pro and you've browsed around, Apple is not shy about pushing those iPad apps in there. Like they're just kind of mixed in with everything. You very quickly run into iPad apps. So from a business perspective, we're competing with those iPad compatible apps when somebody's just browsing around in the App Store looking for stuff to try. So that's that's the other side of this coin, is not only are there less people with Vision Pro devices that can buy your app, but there's also more apps that you're competing up against. I'm going to go through this really quick, but I just wanted to also compare this to the iPad, because that's what everybody asks every time I talk about this with them. The iPad was crazy. It sold so many devices. I didn't realize how popular it was. So on its very first day, it sold 300,000 units. In its first year, it sold 15 million. So that one's super dramatic. I mean, that's probably the most successful initial launch of a Apple product, at least one of their major platforms that they've ever had. And if we look at the Apple Watch, which historically was deemed as a failure, I don't know that that's really a fair comparison to make. This data is actually a lot less reliable than the others, but this one had supposedly 970,000 pre-orders and then 10 million in its first generation. And the reason people call it a failure now is because supposedly Apple was expecting it to sell 20 million and it only sold 10 million. And I think that's why this conversation about is it a success or is it a failure isn't necessarily important for us. All we should really care about is what is the market? What is it that we can actually, or how many people can we actually sell our apps to? So here's all three of them, or all four of these platforms kind of compared. So you can see the Vision Pro, this is based on rumors, so I know these numbers aren't perfect. But I think it's pretty clear, and talking to developers and looking at their download numbers, it's very clear this is a much, much smaller market right now for us to sell apps into. And so that should inform our decisions for how we monetize our apps. If we're trying to make the most amount of money that we can, we need to understand that this is a different environment than the iPhone. But that doesn't mean that there's not money to be made. There's still a lot of opportunity here. I have a couple of pull quotes here just to kind of articulate that. So Christian Seelig, who I talked about earlier, he made Juno. He paid off his Vision Pro on launch day of the Vision Pro. That was because it was a launch day and there's lots of excitement, but still, that was genuine money to be made right there. He has a paid upfront app. That's that YouTube app, Juno, that I was talking about. And it has made a real amount of money. Also, Devin Davies, who he might even be in here somewhere, he gave a talk the other day. His app Crouton, he already had that app on iOS and the Mac, but on the month that he launched his visionOS app, it increased his sales by 200%. So again, there's opportunities here to be making money. Also, conversion rates are kind of amazing on Vision Pro. So what I mean by this is, and this is just a graph of my RevenueCat chart showing the conversion rate for my apps. But what I mean by this is the amount of people who download the app and how many of those actually give me money. So if you look at the yellow line at the bottom of this, that's Dark Noise. This is my iOS app. So about 2-ish, 3% of users who download Dark Noise ever actually give me money. But if you look at Spatial Noise, my visionOS app, it's in the almost 30% range. And I asked about this on Twitter, and a whole bunch of people were telling me they were seeing the exact same thing. People who are downloading your app on Vision Pro are way more likely to give you money than on other products, which makes sense because they just bought a $4,000 device. They have a little bit of disposable income, right? And even Anders here, I like that example. He doesn't even have a native app, but he's still seeing the conversion rate for his iPad compatible app is a lot higher than it is on the iPad. And then I'm not going to read these, but this is a bunch of people. Everybody is trying to conjecture as to why. I think the main thought is it's because people have more money who buy a Vision Pro right now, so they're more likely to pay. But I want to highlight Benedict Evans. I think he makes an interesting point here, which is, he said, everyone who's using one is trying to test everything and see what it is. I've certainly bought stuff on Vision Pro that I've never bought on my iPhone just because I want to know what it is. $10 games I deleted after 30 seconds. Now, that sounds frivolous and bad, but I actually think this is a really interesting point and something we should be thinking about. I'll come back to this as we go. So That was a lot of context, and I don't have a clock, I don't think, so hopefully I'm not like already over time. But you've decided you're going to make a visionOS app, you want to monetize it, what are your options? Well, the options are the same as on the iPhone. You can make a free app with ads, most likely, unless you're one of those qualified other types of apps. Paid upfront, in-app purchase, or subscription. So I'm just going to go through each of these, and we're going to talk about what are the pros and cons in the context of visionOS specifically. So first we're going to talk about free. In my case, I'm going to talk about with ads. There are apps that don't have to have ads, like maybe you don't even want to monetize it at all, or maybe you're like a shopping app like Amazon, or is it Taobao here, or 7-Eleven, something like that. That's the type of app that is allowed to have payments that don't go through in-app purchases. But if you're not one of those, ads is probably the best way for you to monetize. So let's go through just kind of the pros and cons of each. So ads is actually relatively easy to implement. I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of different ad SDKs, but they do make it pretty easy to just add it into your app and then give it a square where you want to put an ad, and then it does a lot of the work for you. It also creates a good value incentive. So this is especially true on like the iPhone or something where you're rewarded for how often your users are using your app. Sometimes that's dangerous because it can make you want to make your app addicting, but it's also valuable just in the sense that developers are incentivized to make the app worth using, right? So you're not just caring about trying to get more people to give you money, you're caring about making them use it regularly. And so I think that's a kind of nice value incentive for developers. But as far as cons, it requires a large user base. This is where all this context comes into play because there isn't really, even if you get 100% of visionOS users, it's not a huge market. I mean, for me, that would be a huge market, but you know what I mean. It's a small group right now, and so that makes this really challenging. Also, with ad SDKs, it's harder to control the user experience, so you don't necessarily get to control what shows up in that box, and so sometimes it's ads that you don't really want representing your app and you can't control that. And a lot of those tools have ways to control it, but then if you start turning off all the, like if you don't want gambling ads in your app and you turn that off, you're gonna start making less money, and so then it starts not really being worth it. So this is pretty much all I have with free with ads, but I think I haven't seen a lot of visionOS apps using it, at least not ones that are just visionOS. So who should choose this? Apps that either somehow already have or need a large user base to make any sense. This is a good opportunity because there's no friction for a user to download the app and start using it. And also apps with a high frequency engagement for each user. So if you've made an app where somebody opens it and uses it multiple times a day, that can help make up for the fact that the user base is smaller because you're still getting all those impressions. But that's a challenge on visionOS just because of the nature of the device right now being something that you don't necessarily live in for long periods of time. But there could be potentially different opportunities there. So it might make sense for you. So now let's move on to paid upfront. This is the original monetization method for the iPhone. So the obvious one here is it is by far the easiest to implement because you don't have to implement anything. You just make your app however you want to make it, and then you set a price in App Store Connect. Now you're going to start making money. That's all you have to do. There's also less expectation of repeat value. I think this is important for visionOS in particular because if somebody downloads your app and you ask them to pay for it, if they're just going to pay once, the question they're going to ask themselves is the thing I'm wanting to do right now worth the amount of money that they're asking me to pay? But if you do something like a subscription, that's not the question they're going to ask. They're going to ask, am I going to use this repeatedly over time? And is the developer going to keep updating it over time? And if you're doing like small experimental apps because we don't know what visionOS is going to be, and you come up with a new idea and you want to move on, if you have a subscription app, they're all going to get pretty upset with you because you stopped updating it. Whereas if it was paid up front and they gave you money 5 years ago and you're not updating it still, that expectation isn't necessarily there. I mean, there will still be people that are mad because people get mad, but it's a lot less so than if it's a subscription app where that expectation is like real and exists. Also, LTV isn't dependent on usage, and LTV is lifetime value. So the actual money that you get from a user doesn't have anything to do with how much they actually use your app. So this is the opposite of what I was saying with ads, where I was saying that's a good thing. But if we remember that quote from earlier, he downloaded an app, used it for 10 seconds, deleted it, and never thought about it again. If your monetization method is based on usage, you're not going to make any money off of that person. But he got the value that he wanted out of the app, which was experiencing the thing. Because that's what visionOS is for a lot of people buying it right now, is an experience thing. They want to get a taste of what the future is like. And so he got that, and then he deleted it and never thought about it again. But that value should still be accruing to you. And so paid up front, make sure that that does happen. And then this isn't a reason you should choose paid up front, but for a paid up front app, people can't leave reviews unless they've paid for it. And anybody who has a free app with like in-app purchases knows that you just constantly get negative reviews from people who download the app for free, realize that it costs money, and they get mad and leave you a 1-star review because it's not free. That can't happen on a paid up front app because you can't leave a review unless you've downloaded it, and you can't download it unless you paid for it. And another one is app reviews smoother. Again, not a reason you should choose it, but Apple definitely scrutinizes, for good reason, apps that have in-app purchases more than paid up front apps. Or at least that's been my and almost everybody I've talked to's experience. If we look at the cons, though, there's no repeat revenue. So if you're trying to make an app that lives for a very long time, you're going to start growing a bigger and bigger and bigger user base that isn't paying you. And this is a really big deal if you have recurring costs. So if you're like a weather app where every time one of your users uses the app, it costs you money, or an AI app where you're hitting a service that's costing you money, pretty soon the new users coming in aren't going to make up for the amount that it's costing you for your giant, big, old user base. And so that is a huge problem with paid upfront, and that's honestly why paid upfront isn't very popular on iOS anymore. It's also a higher barrier to entry. So if your goal is to get a lot of users to try it out, especially in this phase where we're all experimenting and trying to understand what this platform is, a paid upfront app is the hardest app to get somebody to download because they literally, all they have is a name, an app icon, and some pictures to go on to decide whether it's worth the amount of money that you're charging. Whereas if you have something where it's free to download and then they can pay, they at least get to understand the app a little bit better. So I want to talk about how others are monetizing their apps right now, because I noticed something weird. It seems like in visionOS, there's way more paid upfront apps than I've seen anywhere else at all. And so it was hard to find some numbers on this. Luckily, I have a friend, Ariel, at AppFigures, who AppFigures is an analytics company, and he's been very interested in visionOS during this whole process, and he keeps blogging about like tracking how many apps are being developed, how many different monetization methods are people using. And so I worked with him to get some updated numbers, and this is what we got. So a little over 1,000 native apps are on the Vision Pro as of last Wednesday, I think, is when he ran this for me. And it's a little confusing, so I'll break it down here. So you can see about a third are free apps, about a third are paid upfront apps, and then about a third are this mixture of apps that have multiple things. So the red one there, that's subscriptions plus in-app purchases. That's the most popular way for people to do subscriptions because a lot of people also have like a lifetime option. That's why that one's there. But then also there's apps with in-app purchases, and some people have they're paid up front and their subscription and they have in-app purchases. So there's a couple of those mixed in. But for the most part, I think you can break it down into those 3 chunks. There's free apps, there's paid apps, and then there's apps with some kind of in-app purchase system at all. But that doesn't match what I thought I was seeing. And then we talked about it a little bit and we realized just looking at native visionOS apps isn't really necessarily indicative of people building visionOS apps for visionOS. So we filtered out all the apps that are also on iOS and the Mac, because a lot of those are kind of like they're ports of an existing model. They might be using subscriptions or something like that, and then, ports of existing apps, and they might be using a subscription or something like that, and then they bring it over to visionOS, and so they're going to just bring the same monetization method that they have there. So if we just look at visionOS only apps, it totally changes. And here you can see like almost half of the apps are paid up front, which is very different than we see on Apple's other platforms, which I find really interesting. And then a bigger percentage are just free, which I think is people like experimenting with the platform. And then it's a pretty small sliver of apps that are using in-app purchases and subscriptions right now. So I talked to a bunch of people to kind of figure out like what their reasoning is for it. So this is Christian Seelig. I'm not going to read all these because I'm probably already going over time here. But his main point here is he actually thinks subscriptions are better if you're trying to make a long-term business. But Juno, his YouTube app, is kind of a fun hobby side project. And so he didn't want to build some complicated system because he didn't know how long he would be supporting it. I also talked to Ryan McLeod, who makes Black Box, which is a like puzzle game for visionOS. If you haven't tried it, if you get a visionOS, this is one of those apps like you 100% need to download and play with because it teaches you a lot about what's possible on the platform, actually. And he was saying that his reason was he didn't necessarily have as much content. It's a smaller app than his other ones, and he didn't necessarily feel like he knew how to split that off into separate in-app purchases. And also just time, because making a nice in-app purchase flow is more work than just making the app the exact way you want it and then making it paid. So who should use paid up front? I think if you're making some kind of hobby app, that is like an obvious choice to go with. It's the easiest one. It helps you get it out there faster. But only if you don't have recurring user costs. So like if you're a weather app or an AI app with some kind of costs, be very careful doing something like that because you could end up losing more money than you're making. And I think it really makes sense for these like one-time experience apps versus apps that have some kind of ongoing value. The way I've been describing it to people is like, I almost think of a lot of the visionOS apps I've been buying, I'm almost treating more like movies. Like I'm buying it to experience this thing, and maybe I want to show it to one of my friends later, so I want to have it for later, but I'm not going to be going to it day after day. It's more like I just want to see some new experience. If somebody like tweets a video of this cool interaction model that they came up with, I'll download it and try it, even if I don't think I'm going to use it, just because the visionOS is a window into the future, and I just want to like peek at all those different features. So I think that's like a really good type of app that makes sense here. And then also if developers who want to recoup their investment quickly. So if you're trying to get back the money that you put into it quickly, I think paid up front makes a lot of sense here because it's not going to take a long time like subscriptions are going to recur over time, and it doesn't require you to grow a giant user base like ads would. All right, so let's move on to one-time in-app purchases. There's also consumable in-app purchases, which are the ones that like you can buy the same product over and over, like if you're buying gems for a video game. I haven't actually seen anybody using this in visionOS yet. I'm sure there are some, but it doesn't seem to be very popular, and I don't know a whole lot about that one. So we're going to talk about the one-time in-app purchases here. So the pros of this one are it's a lower barrier to entry compared to paid up front. So this is the fact that they can download the app right away and experience at least something with it before they have to choose whether or not they're going to pay for it. And that can make it easier to sell on somebody wanting to pay for it if they actually get to see that it's worth the money. There's also that same less expectation of repeat value as paid up front. So you can come out with something, see how it goes, and then you can move on to the next app idea. And you're not, yes, you need to make sure it doesn't break, but you don't have to keep adding new features because people are paying a subscription to you regularly for it. And then the other nice thing about in-app purchases is you can add more later. So like in the case of a game that has packs of like levels or puzzles to solve, you can come out with more puzzles later, and then you can charge a separate in-app purchase for that. So that's a way that you could monetize an existing user base in the future potentially. For cons, there's no consistent recurring revenue. So you're still going to have that same problem where if you have high per user costs, it could cost you more money to run the app than you're making from new users coming in. And then you have to convince users to pay to upgrade. So I think this is a really important one. Again, coming back to that tweet from earlier about somebody downloading the app, trying it for a couple seconds and deleting it and never thinking about it again. You don't want to give away that value in your like free tier. So you have to be really careful about how you structure where your paywall goes. Because if you made a puzzle app and the first puzzle gave you the experience of using the app, if somebody downloads it and they try that and that was all that they wanted out of it and they deleted it, then like you're not going to make any money from those groups of people. That's not as big of a deal on iOS because the user base is much larger, but here you have to think a little bit more clearly about stuff like that. And then it's a little more complicated to implement. You know, one-time or paid upfront apps are super simple. You don't have to do anything. Here, you do have to create some products in App Store Connect. You have to figure out how to, you know, have a free tier that has content locked and then you unlock it later. I would highly recommend, there's this company called RevenueCat that makes software that makes this a lot easier. You know, I think they have a booth somewhere out there. You should probably go find them and talk to them about it. That makes it easier, but it's definitely more complicated than a paid upfront app. So who should use these? It's going to be very similar to paid upfront. So hobby apps, assuming you don't have recurring per user costs. And then it's that same thing, one-time experiences versus apps with ongoing value. I think here, you can take that metaphor even further. You could have multiple experiences in your app that each have their own in-app purchase. And again, kind of thinking of it like movies, like you have a movie app and you can buy a single movie one at a time depending on which experience you want. So these are the types of things that I think make sense a lot here. And yeah, that's apps with packs of content or experience to unlock. How am I doing on time? Because I literally have no idea and I just want to make sure. Oh, there is a clock there. Okay. Poorly is how I'm doing on time. All right, we're gonna go through this quick, but Yordi gave me a quote. Yordi makes lots of apps. I'm not gonna even talk about it. So subscriptions, why they're by far the most popular apps, the most popular monetization method on iOS, iPad OS, even Mac OS nowadays, because it works and because as it's costing you money to have users, you want to be making money from those users as well, right? So everything's a little different on visionOS though, but let's go through those. So the biggest pro here is you're rewarded for delivering recurring value to users. If you keep pushing new updates and making the app better and better over time, people will keep regularly paying and they'll be happy to pay. You'll, of course, get people who are mad because they hate subscriptions, but the people who do pay are doing it because they genuinely like the app, and they'll reward you for it continually. This also has that lower barrier of entry for more downloads. So you can get lots of people to download the app for free. In fact, sometimes it's even easier with a subscription app to do that because you can set up trials really easily. Although with visionOS, I haven't ran like tests on this, but I would be really careful about trials because again, if we come back to that quote, if people are going to use your app and then delete it right after and never think about it again, then a 3-day trial, that more than covers the amount of time and value they want to get out of the app. So you might be careful about running trials on visionOS right now. And then it can pay for those high per user costs. So if you're running a weather app or AI or something like that, this can help fund that so that you don't end up losing more money than you're making. As far as cons though, it is a little more complicated to implement, similar to in-app purchases, and also you should use RevenueCat to make that easier. And just like in-app purchases, you have to convince users to pay to upgrade, which can, I think, maybe be harder to do on visionOS. I think it's especially true for subscriptions on visionOS because, like I kind of talked about earlier, if somebody is presented a paywall and it's a subscription, the question they're going to ask themselves is, do I think I'm going to use this frequently enough to be worth paying for it continually? And I think a lot of people, when they buy this device, they don't know why they're buying it yet. Like I said, it's a window into the future. And so they don't know if it's going to sit on their shelves for the next 6 months or if they're going to use it every day. And so it's going to be a harder sell than on the iPhone where they already know they're going to use it every day to do some kind of recurring cost like that. And then you must deliver recurring value to retain those customers. So this is what I was talking about earlier. If you have a subscription app and you don't update it, people will cancel it and then you will stop making that money. And so subscription services require you to like really, or subscription apps require you to like truly invest in that app if you want to keep it alive and not have users get upset at you. Whereas a paid upfront app, that expectation isn't necessarily there. So who should use subscriptions? Apps with high per user fees, that's the obvious one because otherwise you might lose more money than you make. And then I think the really big use case here is if you already have an iOS or a macOS app that has a subscription, then adding visionOS support is a really nice feature for your subscription product. Users who don't even have the visionOS or the Vision Pro will still see that as a benefit because they're like, oh, if I choose this app over this one, if I eventually get a Vision Pro, they have support for that. So it'll actually help your other sales. I think that's what's happening with apps like Crouton when he said that he had a whole lot more sales during the month that visionOS came out. It's not just from people who own a Vision Pro. It's also from people who own the iPhone. And it also makes for a really good marketing story, which gets your name out there more, and people are just more interested in the platform because it's so new. So what's my recommendation? This is why we're here. How do we make money on visionOS? This is obviously, we're only a couple months in. This is going to change rapidly, probably over the next year. And I'm just one person who's weirdly obsessed with apps and businesses. But this is kind of where I'm thinking and what I would recommend for somebody who doesn't already have a vision and a plan, if you're just trying to think about how you should do this. So to start, I think making a lot of small apps is the right approach here. Try things out, experiment, try and come up with new paradigms, take advantage of the hardware to make something new and interesting that only can really be done on visionOS. And then once you've done that, I would go with paid upfront, which is a weird thing for a RevenueCat employee to recommend because that means you're not using us. Or you can use in-app purchases, which I think is actually similar. It's just a little bit more work. But unless you have a good reason not to, I think those are the best methods to go with right now if you're really trying to maximize the amount of money that you're actually going to make on these apps. I would price those apps high. So like we talked about, visionOS users seem to be pretty price insensitive. But you need to experiment with that because that's going to change over time, and it's going to change as new countries are brought into the fold. I think Tim Cook just recently said China is the next one to get access to it. That market might be different than the US market is, which might be different than European market or something like that. So this isn't a guarantee, but right now it does seem like you can price it a lot higher than you would price an iPhone app or an iPad OS app because those users just bought a $4,000 device. They have $10 to spare. And then a really important thing is I think it's really important to create compelling video demos. Because if you want to get attention, you can't rely on just people who own a Vision Pro to help spread the message. It's just too small of a market. But if you can make a really interesting video demo, people who don't own the device yet are still going to be fascinated by that, and then they'll share it. And if that's the only real opportunity I think you have for virality right now. And so these are kind of the things that I would say if you don't know what you're wanting to do, this is the way to go if you're going to try and make money. So big shout out, this is the end of the talk by the way. Big shout out to Ariel from AppFigures. He helped me out a lot in trying to figure this out. We found some bugs I think in Apple's APIs for getting this stuff too, and it was a whole thing. So he did a lot of work to help me get some of these numbers. This is a link to his blog. He talks about running apps, not just visionOS, but all of Apple and Google's platforms. And it's a really good blog. I highly recommend it. And I promise you, this was not on purpose. This morning, when I was checking to make sure this link still worked, when I opened it up, the very top of the page is an interview with the CEO of RevenueCat that he did. I didn't even know we were doing this. So if you go there now, you'll actually get to see an interview of my CEO of my company. And then here is all of my information. You can find me on most of the social networks, and then that link goes to a website where you can find anything else about me. Look at that. I'm 50 seconds to spare. This is amazing. I guess I don't have time for questions though, but thank you all. This was very fun.